Dan. Hello, everybody. This is Mike Feener. I work at GE Aviation as a supplier quality engineer, and in other capacities, I manage an APQP sub-team that helps to communicate the changes that are implemented by APQP, both within GE and to our supply base. I've also worked on our internal procedures to update them with regard to APQP, such as our source change process and our new product development process. I've been with GE for about 3.5 years. All in all, worked in quality and the production side of things for just a little over 10 years now. And we go to the next slide. I want to be talking to you about the PPAP file and the PPAP submission. So Dan and everyone up to this point has talked about what's involved and when to apply it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what applies and what it means to submit a PPAP. So before we do that, I want to go through a couple of definitions just to kind of level the playing field before we go into the details. So what is a PPAP file? A PPAP file, it's a living document. So think of it like a PFMEA. Every time something changes, it gets updated. Same thing with the PPAP file. The PPAP file is a living file containing all of the elements to support the PPAP requirements. And the difference between a PPAP file and a PPAP submission is the PPAP submission is what you turn in. The PPAP file is everything as far as elements go that make up the PPAP requirements. The PPAP submission then is going to contain all the elements that are required to be submitted to your customer as defined by the submission level. And we'll go through those details and just kind of wanted to clarify there is a difference between those two terms. And then we have the PPAP approval form, which is an element of the PPAP, and its function is to provide the status of the PPAP. Is it approved? Is it an interim approval? Is it rejected? And it also verifies the contents of what's submitted in the PPAP submission. And then there's a fourth definition, and this is really the only place I'll talk about this within the presentation. It's the pre-launch control plan. So I think the term control plan probably isn't new to any of us, but there's a pre-launch control plan within the APQP elements, and that really what it includes is additional process controls and features that may not be in your final production control plan. So if you're running during the development process, say if you're running a design of experiments and you're toggling and measuring features to understand the design of the hardware, that might be something you include in your pre-launch control plan, but maybe not necessarily in your final production control plan as you're trying to understand the product. And also you might go if you're utilizing design for Six Sigma in the house of quality process, you might look at certain features to understand how your design acts with an application to make sure you're meeting the customer requirements at the interface level, at the system FMEA level. And so all of those things are items that you might find in your pre-launch control plan that may not be in your final production control plan. And again, that's really the only place we'll mention that today. If you have further questions on that specific item, feel free to put them in the chat. Or again, we'd love for you to put ideas for future webinars in there as well. Anything you'd like to see. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the PPAP file. Okay, so what elements make up the PPAP file? There are 13 elements referenced on the right there that make up a PPAP file. And the file includes all of these elements, regardless of the submission level, regardless of what your customer is asking you to submit. The PPAP file is to include these elements. And again, this is real-time information. So as these elements get updated, like the PFMEA, control plans, your process maps, all those are living documents. Therefore, your PPAP file is a living document. Again, so I just want to reiterate that. That's what makes it a living document. And there could be many formats for the PPAP file. You know, there are industry standard formats for PFMEAs and control plans and how to conduct measurement system analysis. But those industry standard formats communicate what the standard requirements are, and what those what the characteristics are for each of those elements, how to build a PFMEA, what to include in a control plan. But you could have various formats, as long as we're meeting those industry standard requirements and your customer requirements. That's really what the main goal is. And the PPAP file, it's the source of the information for your PPAP submittal. So when your customer is asking for, the first round PPAP or a resubmission of a PPAP because of a change, which Dan's process map really laid out well when to apply, APQP and PPAP if you're undergoing a change for resubmittal. You'll pull the information from your PPAP file. So as long as you keep your PPAP file a live document, including real-time information, anytime there is a change, the submittal becomes a lot easier and quicker to manage when you're submitting it to your customer. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about what the PPAP submission, or the evidence of your PPAP file is. So the submission level, what you provide your customer, is defined by your customer. There are 5 submission levels within the industry standard, AS 9145, and the supplemental requirements, AS 13100. I'll show you table 11 in the next slide that will, here in a moment, that will define what those levels are specifically. But the default, remember, is level 3. And the submission levels are dictated by the type of situation that you're facing. Is it a new product? Is it a resubmission of a PPAP where you're simply you're undergoing a process change to one feature? You might be adding a machine that affects a few features on the first article, and not necessarily undergoing a design change. So your PPAP submittal, it'll vary based on the type of change, and it's really the differences in the submission levels are. It really comes out as to what you're providing to the customer. So you're not going to be asked to submit all PPAP elements in every situation. For some situations you might, but those PPAP submission levels, again, are defined by your customer. The default is level 3, and you can take a look at what those submission levels are on the next slide. And then, but here on this slide, one final note is that some elements allow for on-site witnessing. That is allowed within the PPAP approval process. And so this flow diagram kind of it describes the PPAP submission process. This is taken from the reference manual 13145. So you can find this in there. You're going to evaluate your PPAP file for the submission, and then prepare what that submission is going to look like, within the format, what elements are going to be provided, and then submit that to the customer. Then your customer is going to tell you, are you approved? Are there items that we still need, but I could approve you to interim ship the product, and then follow up with an action to submit those final documents? Or do we have to reject the PPAP because there is an issue? We need to go back and resubmit. So when you get that green light, either with approval or interim approval, that's when you know that you're good to ship product. Next slide, please. Here's the table 11 that describes the 5 submission levels that I talked about on the previous slide. And you'll see on the left there are designators for what to submit. to the customer within the submission level, what's going to be retained at the supplier and available, upon request to the customer. And then again, there's the ability to witness certain elements on site. There may be intellectual property and sensitive material that we can't share, via the PPAP submission. So in those cases, for those elements, we can witness those on site. And then there's one final submission designator that would allow for either to submit to the customer or witness on site. So the various submission levels are described in this table, and your customer will tell you which submission level, depending on the situation. Is it a new product? Is it a design change? Is it a process change? Is it a source change or a transfer? Depending on the situation, that'll dictate what submission level your customer is requiring of you. Next slide. A couple more slides here. So here's the PPAP approval form, and this is the form as it's represented in AS 9145. And again, the purpose of the PPAP approval form, which is an element of the PPAP, is to communicate if the PPAP has been accepted or rejected overall. And there are again, this document can have multiple formats as long as it includes the elements required of a PPAP approval form. And one of those elements is, the PPAP status, like I talked about previously. It'll designate whether the PPAP has been fully approved or you have interim approval because there are certain items that haven't been fulfilled, but the organization, your customer will allow you to ship as long as we have a follow-up action to submit that final PPAP for approval. Or, maybe there's an issue with one of the elements or some of the elements of the PPAP submittal, and we have to reject and go back and correct those items, whatever they may be. So this approval form will tell you, right, when you have the ability to ship hardware. Last slide here. And this slide is going to tie in and kind of supplement some of the things that Dan said at PCC, and also some of the content that both Carl and Rob are going to share in the following slides. And that's when is resubmission required? Resubmission of a PPAP. That to define what resubmission is, it's required when a previously approved product or process undergoes a change. So we're talking about change management here with resubmission. And you can ask yourself, what is a previously approved product? That could be a product that has previously been submitted under a PPAP and been approved, or it could be existing product that's undergoing a change. Both situations apply when it comes to submitting PPAP. And again, I'll leave it up to Carl and Rob to kind of go through some additional details on change management. So thank you for your time. Now I'll hand it over to Carl Evans, go through content on demystifying APQP phases 1 through 4. Thank you.